The main highlights you'll often hear about Studio MDHR's Cuphead is its amazing animation production and its crushing difficulty, both points respectively evaluating the game as a cartoon and as a run-and-gun shooter, since it is both a throwback to vintage 1930s cartoons and run-and-gun side-scrollers of the 8 to 16-bit era. Cuphead works as both a visual marvel that's fun to spectate and as a compelling challenge to play, or even a hilarious game to watch people fail at, because its style and its interactivity are not mutually exclusive. Its style doesn't distract from the depth of how the game plays, and how the game plays is accentuated by how it looks. In other words, Cuphead has invisible style. A lot of what makes the game a versatile production is how they worked with the compromises of both making a convincing cartoon and making a fast-paced action game. Invisible style is a term originating from classical filmmaking. It describes the inner machinations and techniques used to make a film's presentation convincing so that it doesn't distract from the story that it's trying to tell. A shaky, handheld camera in Cloverfield, or a YouTuber's abundant usage of props and obvious paid actors has little to no invisible style, while the incredible animation within live action of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, by utilizing robotics and even blow-up dolls to make the cartoons work with the live actors, is both an essential aspect to the film's story and an all-around convincing effect. Invisible style is something considered for just about any creative production to this day, and it's important to note that the techniques used to make something don't feel the need to show themselves off, but merely work behind the scenes, which is why I personally feel games often have the hardest time pulling off invisible style when so many design choices are blatantly shown on screen and the nature of a game's production doesn't look as convincing as just doing a cinematic of it. The YouTube channel Boundary Break probably proves me wrong here, as there are plenty of clever behind-the-scenes workings to make a game look convincing, and I can think of close contenders for the perfect blend of style and substance. Sonic Generations just remove the HUD and you essentially have a really cool looking Sonic cutscene while having the benefit of playing it. And a lot of character action games embrace their style to give its video gamey nature substance, but Cuphead floors just about any other example that I can think of, and here's why. A big part of its appeal is the amount of animation going into its presentation. Working with the constraints of making a hand-drawn cartoon, the animations of characters, bosses, enemies, effects, and even projectiles are drawn with multiple frames and animated at 24 frames per second, an economical and theatrical frame rate used to represent cinematic motion. But in this case, it's used as a time-centric technique to give the game an old-timey look beyond just using a film-grained filter over the screen. Now, a video game that focuses heavily on action and keeping track of a dozen objects in motion at once is begging for it to be at 60 frames per second. Therefore, to make the game perform smoothly while also making the pacing feel fast and giving you an efficient awareness to everything going on at once. Cuphead managed to find the best of both worlds. It kept the choppy animation and filter while making it so that when an object moves, the engine makes them move at 60 frames per second. As a matter of fact, projectile movements and enemy patterns all have a particular tweening animation, either moving in straight lines, curves, or sine functions, something a lot of 2D games and flash animations use to make objects move from one place to another without drawing every frame of its journey. Think of keyframes in Adobe Premiere. It's a very subtle technique that might not be noticeable the first time you play, but when you do, you'll realize it's serviceable for both the game's presentation and you being able to play the game well. Bosses are very dynamic and take a lot of screen priority during fights. A lot of them have multiple transformations and forms that blend so seamlessly that trying to beat them for 2 hours of frustration doesn't make you realize they only last for about 2 minutes. If anything, the game could have just been a short cartoon about each of these boss fights. The animation, however, is not only elaborate, but it's efficient, because in reality, they're just really well animated 2D sprites. This flower, for example, does a lot of crazy stuff in the actual fight, but it's very clear when it's in a standby animation, when it does its little dance, when it prepares for an attack animation, when it actually does the attack animation, and it all blends well from one to the other to give the illusion that it is a full animation on its own. The game gives an impression of an organic cartoon, but careful observation can make it pretty clear what animations are what, and knowing when an enemy attacks or when it's vulnerable is pretty important for a run-and-gun high-class bout. There's a lot of other subtle design choices the game uses, such as minimal heads-up displays to keep the cartoon look preserved, how, aside from the run-and-gun sections, every boss takes place on a single storyboarded screen with a painted background and thick outlines on whatever is a sprite, much like how traditional cells of animations work, and how the game makes full use of a single screen while even working with the modern standard of a 16:9 ratio as opposed to a 4:3 for the sake of nostalgia. As a whole, Cuphead is as stimulating and compelling to watch as it is to play, and employing methods of animation in the background with efficient game making when playing it hands-on is what makes it shine as a product for the looks and for solid gameplay. Seeing initial teasers for Cuphead and how limited footage was shown really brought this home. To me, at first impressions, it looked like a proof of concept for a cartoon about a video game, which made me think less about how it actually would play like. How it does actually play is very frantic, hard, difficult, and challenging as balls, but that's nothing new to this world really. However, the fact that Cuphead can be regarded in these two different angles shows its convincing and visible style as a game portraying itself as a cartoon. It's essentially a double product, and for 20 bucks, you're not just paying for plenty of levels and replay value, but for high quality animation that will impress just about anyone, and the satisfaction of beating a challenge and feeling good about yourself. Hey Justine, guess what? I beat Cuphead.
Oh wow, that's amazing!
Thanks. Did all myself.